March 29th of 2022. We appreciate those who are attending with us in person. Also, John, I don't know if we have anyone online.
Not yet.
Sometimes it might be good to identify who's online, so we know who's with us, but if you would keep an eye on that, I'd appreciate it. We'll start our meeting tonight. Looks like Council Member Ekstrom is not with us this evening. So, Councilmember Severing, I appreciate that. If you would jump in and give us a invocation or a thought that's on your mind and then lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, I would appreciate that.
I'd be happy to. Heavenly Father, we do come before thee. We're grateful for the rain that is falling. We're grateful that we live in such an incredible area and with citizens who are so awesome and supportive. And we're mindful of those who might struggle at this time physically or mentally or emotionally, and also those who may have lost loved ones. We ask blessings of comfort and strength to attend them. And tonight we also give thanks for this great country that we live in, for the blessings that we each enjoy. We pray for peace to continue to be found in all the world if possible. We ask for guidance and direction this evening, that decisions rendered would be according to thy will and for the best benefit of the citizens. And we give thanks and pray for this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
If you'll join with me, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Severing, for stepping in and leading us in the pledge and that invocation. We'll now go on to our consent agenda. This is a special meeting. The agenda has been properly signed and is attached to the packet for the meeting tonight. Are there any questions on that from the public or anyone that's here? Okay, we'll move forward then. Council, you've had a chance to look at the agenda, or are there any conflicts of interest that need to be disclosed this evening regarding the items we'll be discussing? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, which is an action to consider the February 8th, 2022 City Council meeting minutes. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at those. Are there any questions, corrections on that? Seeing none, I would look then for a motion to approve the February 8th, 2022 City Council meeting minutes. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Councilmember Swanson. Do we have a second?
A second.
Second by Councilmember Severing. Are there any further discussion on the minutes? All those in favor of approving those minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Swanson, for your motion, and Councilmember Severing. The vote is unanimous. We'll move on now to item number 4, which is an action to consider approving the February 22nd, 2022, or some would say 2/2 of 22 minutes. Any discussion on those minutes?
I have a small correction. that I saw.
Councilmember Dalpaz, what would your correction be?
Ironically, it was under my update for Councilmember Dalpass on page 24 of the packet. Instead of saying that Councilmember Dalpass reported the number of building permits issued so far this year is lower than the same time frame for the past 2 years, it was supposed to say was lower than the same time frame last year.
Katie, did you get that correction?
I did, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Dalpaz has made a correction to the minutes. With that correction, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
So moved by Councilmember Dalpaz. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Ekstrom. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. The motion passes unanimously on a motion made by Councilmember Dalpaz and seconded by Councilmember Ekstrom. We'll now move into item number 5, which would be public comments. So those who are here, if you would mind stepping up to the podium to make your comments. And just a reminder that I'd like to limit those to 5 minutes. And if you would state your name and if you're a resident of North Ogden. And John, if you would watch online to see if anyone has any comments. That would be the time. If somebody has some comments they'd like the council to consider.
Hi there, good evening. I am Tyler Crittenden. I am a North Ogden city resident, and I've actually talked to several of you on the phone and a couple in person. So we live in the Indian Hill subdivision, and we would like to add an attached third-car garage. And, one of the challenges we looked at it here, so to build a garage, it needs to be 12 feet wide, and it's 20 feet to the property line, about 54 feet to the neighbor's house. And as I talked to John Call and a couple of people, it sounds like in the R110, they want to have a 10-foot setback on each side. And as we talked about it, a couple of people mentioned to maybe come and talk to the city council and get your thoughts on possibly amending that from 10 feet to 8 feet on one side of the house, maybe with some parameters and things like that. So thought I would get your thoughts or comments on doing that. So,
Council, have any questions for Mr. Crittenden, or would you like to hear from our planning folks?
I do have drawings or plat maps too, if anyone wants to see anything like that. So,
I think the issue would be the setbacks and amending that. That's R110, I'm assuming, Mr. Crittenden lives in. And the setbacks are 10 and 14 currently.
Yep, so the R110 setbacks are not to be less than 24 total, so it could be 10 and 14 or 12 and 12, unless there's an attached garage on one side, in which case you can go 10 and 10, so down to 20 feet. And this is similar to some of our other codes. R18 allows a 10 and an 8 if you have an attached garage, so we do have areas of the city where an 8 foot on one side would be possible. It's just that R110 has the standard that the minimum that you can be is 10 feet from your property line on one side.
So what would you attribute the 10 foot versus the 8 foot, just on the
I'm guessing
minimum
it's just-
lot size?
Yeah, just in the original establishing of the lots or the zoning and wanting to have that separation between property owners. And so it, you know, in this particular case, as I've looked at it, his house to the next structure is
54 feet.
54 feet. So in this case, I think that 8 foot doesn't, it really isn't a large impact. It's when you get two property owners next to each other that have that 8 and 8 that things could start to feel a little bit squeezed. It doesn't constitute a variance. There's nothing particularly unique about that lot that would say, you know, a variance to have a third car garage. And a third car garage isn't one of those essential property rights the same way having, like, being able to physically build a house or a structure on it is. So staff's recommendation was to come to the council and see if there's any interest in looking at either some sort of reduction or, you know, retaining the 20 feet overall, but one side could be reduced to 8 in certain circumstances. So you might have like an 8 and a 12, which again, in this particular case, the other side of his home is 20 plus feet away from the property line. So it's, you know, there's nothing inherently special about the 10 foot. It's just what the R110 zone and the HP1 zone have been established to be since they're probably their beginning.
So just so I understand, theoretically, if it's 24 feet in the aggregate, it could be 20 feet, right? Each resident could select the 10 foot on the same side.
Right. Yep.
And the 14 on the other. So literally they can be 20 feet
Right now.
apart. So
Yeah.
I understand what the ordinance is, and I must confess, I thought the house next to Mr. Crittenden's would be condemned when I lived in it some years ago, 35 years ago. I did, I lived next door to him. So could an ordinance be that there's a minimum aggregate amount between houses, or that kind of could mess up, I guess, the first come, first serve, right?
Yeah,
If
that's
somebody
where-
took up the 10 or 14 feet, but
Yeah,
let me,
there's still R110 left to be developed in the city. The majority of it's HP1, which is an R110 zone with additional studies applied to it because you're getting further up the hill in the sensitive areas. But it does become a who comes first issue. So the same with our accessory buildings, where we eliminated the provision that talked about proximity to a structure on another property owner's property. Just make it about what you want to have on your property, the look and feel on that particular thing without relating it to someone else's house.
okay, thanks, Scott. Let me ask the council member Swanson.
Would
Looks
we
like you
have
have a
this on an
comment.
upcoming agenda and have staff investigate this and make a recommendation to council?
Yeah, I don't think tonight we would be making a decision, but if you'd like further investigation, or if the majority of the council would like to look at this, then we can give direction to the planning team to do that. Councilman Barker, would you like to pursue this further? Councilmember Swanson, I assume with your comment. Councilmember Ekstrom, would you be
Yeah,
willing to have
yeah, I'd
planning?
like
with
to see if we could reword the ordinance so that it could be a little more flexible.
Councilmember Dalpas?
I always thought that R110 was kind of like a less dense zone than R18. And from what I just heard from Scott, if I understood it right, is R18 allows 8 feet on the setback. And the R10 is only down to 10, so that just doesn't make that much sense to me. So I would love to hear what staff would recommend, so let's do that.
I believe we have an R18 lot sizes the same size that are in 110 occasionally.
Yeah.
So we have like kind lots there, but Mr. Crittenden will ask for further input from the planning department, but it sounds like the council is willing to at least address that. Did you have
Well, you just didn't ask, Blake.
oh, I'm sorry, Blake. Would you
I'm
like to
sitting
make a
so low,
comment?
you can't see me anyway, so, no, I'm okay for looking at it.
I'm
as well.
sorry.
It's okay.
So, all right. Looks like we'll at least ask for input from the planning department and consider that, Mr. Crittenden. Okay.
Thank you, council members.
Mhm. All right, Councilmember Swanson. We're going to move on to item number 6 now, which is a discussion on our fiscal year 2022-23 budget. We have with us our finance director, who will also be actively participating in the discussion, but if you'd like to lead out, please do so.
Thank you. John, can you go to the next slide, please? We have looked at these numbers once before, and as we listen to Jamie's, excuse me, Jamie's presentation tonight, and as we talk about the budget and where we are and where we need to go, keep in mind the hierarchical needs that we've been talking about for the last month or so, and outcomes-based budgeting, where we are looking for those deliverables that are being provided to our residents. So with that, Jamie.
Awesome, okay, thanks. All right, so,
I'll confess that, trying to keep up with the mayor and Jamie is, I feel like I've got a rope tied to me at the back end of a jet that's taken off. I just hang on for dear life sometimes.
thanks, Bill. Just real quick, we can go over the budget schedule. So obviously we're here tonight to talk about budget highlights. We do want to talk about percentages, maybe some discussion on salary benefits, and then have the financial report. The idea this year is to present deliverables by department, and so the schedule is laid out for those presentations. And then to make sure that we do approve the tentative budget by May 10th, and then final approval in June, unless we go through truth and taxation. So, as a reminder of how we got to the 9.6 million estimated for 2023, most of it does involve the property tax, where we're estimating a 7% inflation rate, along with growth. And then 6% on sales tax. Everything else pretty much remains constant. Even with building permits and B&C road money. So we can move to the next slide. Okay. Did you include percentages?
No.
No. Okay. Okay, so that totally changes it up. All right. So here it is. These are the budget estimates that we have this far. How we got to this number, we looked back at the last 5 years worth of expenditures, and based on that percentage is how we got to allocate all of the funds for each department. So based on the 9.6 million. Does that make sense? Here it is.
Sorry, it's not very big.
It's not very big, no.
Give
How did I get
everybody a
to-
moment to take a look and scroll down through that.
So there will be some, I don't want to say shortcomings, but there will be some of the department's budgets where these numbers won't be sufficient for all of the requests for this year. And I do believe that that is part of the direction that we're looking for tonight, is how to answer those questions on how we are going to budget for those shortcomings. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave.
I think it might be well to show the council the all-in budget with everything that's been requested by members of the council and by department heads, to show just how close we are. By law, we're required to have a balanced budget. And we previously set some goals to look long-term. We had a short meeting prior to the council meeting with Councilman Swanson, myself, and John and Jamie. And I would just say this, and this is in no way being critical, but what's happened here is we've kicked things down the road for a number of years in this city. For instance, there were many, many years that we didn't pay our employees market rates. And you could get away with that, right? But we've made a commitment to make sure we are paying market rates to our team members here, our employees. And so we've had to catch up pretty heavily the last 3 or 4 years. That's caught up with us. We didn't save a lot of money for a public safety building that we need. That's caught up with us. So I think the question here is, do we want to operate day to day and kick things down the road and face them, let somebody else face them? Or do we head on with it now and make that determination? That's kind of my thoughts. I would add to that this budget that you're going to see here, that Jamie's going to show you, includes, as mentioned, a 7% implied rate in increasing existing property taxes. I'm very concerned about that with inflation and what's going on with a lot of our senior citizens. I think this would impact their standard of living with everything that's going on. We've considered a continued level of building permits in here, which is substantially used to help fund our planning department. With the question of rising interest rates and costs, will building continue at its current level? And then the sales tax trend. We were talking earlier, I think our revenues since 2016 have gone up, our tax revenues between sales tax and property tax, 2.8 million, or some 60%. And we figured a way to spend it all. So now what do we do? So Jamie, maybe you could show the council here some of the things that have been requested to be added in and show them what the bottom line budget is. That might generate some discussion.
Okay, great.
Do you mind if I turn off the light? Or John can turn off the light for Dave?
Race to the light. John, maybe you could pull up the budget first, just to show what the bottom line budget is, before we get into that detail.
So if, John, if you could go back to the what's included and go down to the bottom of that, I think that's gonna show the better picture. So scroll down a little more. So the blue column is that percentage that we talked about where we looked back over the last 4 years of actual, but we also included the 5th year, which is the current year we're in now, 22. So that's how we came up with this percentage. And then in the red column, and it's column E, D and E that the mayor is referring to, that if we were to grant all of the requests that were given, if you scroll down to the bottom, we're looking at a $10.1 million budget, where we're projecting 9.6. So there is a shortfall there if we were to include everything that's requested. Let's go back up to the top, and some of the things that are in here is the 23rd officer for half the year. So it's anticipated they would start January 1st. There is a depreciation correction that is included in that. I don't know if you want me to get in details of that, but right now. 80 hours of vacation cash out. This is, right now, there's 40 hours that are included in that. This is the addition to make that 80 hours. Full-time CSO from a part-time. And then adding a full-time staff member who's currently part-time as well. Fuel cost increases. There's not much we can do about that, but that is what is projected. I believe this is based on $5.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. So hopefully it doesn't go past that, right? Let's see. Salaries at market rate for thanks, John.
Sorry.
Cherry days increase. Right now we're just doing fireworks, but to get cherry days back to where we used to have it, I believe. That's an additional charge there. And then some other benefit costs increase to employees for health insurance and 401k.
Jamie, we had a target to be able to transfer into the capital projects fund.
Yes.
This council set that goal over and above the payment for the bond. If this budget were be adopted, what was the number? $11,000? $11,000.
What was the target?
500,000.
500. That's to prevent from kicking things down the road, because we're going to have to maintain our buildings. We're going to have to rotate our parks equipment. So, and that includes keeping building permits at the same level.
Yes.
And a 7% increase in the existing rate, dollar-wise, not necessarily the rate, but dollar-wise, with growth. So $11,000 with basically no cushion.
Correct. What else would we like to talk about?
John,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No.
Can we go to that slide that you and I rearranged the wording on? That one right there. I think that's where we ought to, perhaps, Mayor, if you're okay with it, if we should start that discussion now. If we go back to the, Don, if you can jump back a couple of slides to the one where we can take a look at, go back one more. Sorry, the spreadsheet that you had up that showed what's included.
Additional requests.
Sorry.
Sorry, I got you bouncing between files. Right there. So let's highlight number 3, line 3.
Just making sure I'm sharing the item with the those on Zoom.
Yeah. So did Jamie explain to us in real layman's terms, as you did for me years ago, what this department correction, depreciation correction, I can read that from here. Depreciation correction for all departments. Explain to us what was happening and why this number is in there and what it does for us. In just general terms.
All right, so we have a special revenue fund called motor pool. And this is where we handle all of our fleet, and that includes all the equipment and vehicles citywide. And included in that is a fund line item called depreciation. And if depreciation is used properly, it's essentially a savings mechanism to replace all of that equipment for each department. What's been happening over the last few years is what our accountants call a plug number.
A what number?
A plug.
HOK.
PLUG.
Everyone knows.
We're basically saying that we're spending all the cash that was being saved in the motor pool fund to replace those vehicles and equipment. So we were not setting aside depreciation funds. We were using words like unfunded depreciation as a plug number, or using fund balance, which is using cash. So there's no savings. There's some savings, but we had not been saving for the last at least 4 years. And we have been depleting that fund.
So this number here, the 445,757.
So that number there is
That's
for
to catch us up,
that's to
right?
catch us up just for the year of for fiscal year 23. This
Right.
is not to catch up for the 4 years.
For all the
This is
other
1
years.
year. This is for police, parks, and streets.
So that's an ongoing
That's
number.
an ongoing number that.
And what that is, it's to replace police vehicles. We're on a 5-year rotation.
Yes,
Snow plows, which were on a 20-year rotation, which is a little bit dangerous. But I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but John, I believe this was how the council instructed some years ago, right?
Yeah, it was to use the cash in the balance and then to buy with cash every year was what was kind of the direction back then.
But if I understood Jamie earlier, we've eaten up $200,000 of that fund in the last couple of years. And so I'm not being critical, but I don't know how we expected we could pay cash for things when we're eating up $200,000 a year and we accumulated 300 over numerous years. This would allow the city to have the funds to rotate police cars every 5 years. And I'm not sure it's a good rotation of 20 years on a snowplow. Dave, you like that? 20 years? So that's the number. Is now we're saying to depreciate and build funds to rotate those out properly. That would be the annual depreciation going forward.
It technically would be 100.6 million.
Well,
4 years.
if you looked back and said we wanted to start 4 years ago accumulating, you'd be correct. But, someone said, when's the best time to plant a tree?
Yesterday.
4 years ago, but what's the second best time, right? So we're on the second best time. If the council agrees that's what they want to do, the option is, kick it down the road, and when a snowplow comes up, hope we have the money for it. Or when police cars need rotation, we hope we have the money for it.
So John, if you'll bounce back to the PowerPoint. And go to the questions that So the reason that I wanted you to take a look at that number is we have a fundamental question that as a council from a policy standpoint that we need to answer. And that is, I think the answer is fairly obvious. but not necessarily so. Should the city save for the future? Is that something that we want to be doing, or as Mayor just mentioned, that we kind of spend as we go, and when we have that truck that's needed down the future, we hope that the cash is there to make that happen? Tell me your thoughts. JD, excuse me, Councilmember Dalpas.
I would love to save for the future. Seems like the wise path.
Councilman Severin.
Well, I think we always need to be prepared, so my wife and I save for the future. I think it's a sound budgetary decision.
Okay, Councilmember Ekstrom.
Same, I agree. We need, and then now, this is saving for the future for future capital expenditures like the fleet, not our rainy day fund that we're already saving for, correct? Yes. I just think that's a good idea. I mean, we can't, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know how much things are going to cost in the future, but we can at least have, you know, if you've got a car, you know it's going to wear out. You know, when you got it paid off, then you start putting that car payment into a savings account for when you need the next car, right? And so I think that's just good practice, good policy.
Councilmember Parker.
Yes. We've only had this fund for 4 years. Is that correct? Is that? did I
Motor
hear that
pool.
right? Oh,
How long have we had the motor pool
No,
fund?
we've had the motor pool
Or
for
the
quite some
depreciation
time, but
bill.
it's the depreciation change. It's been about 4 years.
The fire district actually does that. We contribute a lot to our, for that purpose. And like Councilmember Ekstrom said, everything changes, but it's a lot easier to buy something if you have a lot saved up.
And by the way, just to put into perspective, the money we're saving for a rainy day fund or to rotate park equipment and to maintain the buildings, under this budget, that's $11,000. That's what we're putting away to maintain the parks, equipment as needed, to maintain our buildings, and to do anything else that got, under this budget, that'd be $11,000. With a 7% anticipated increase in property taxes.
The reason that we've asked this question and shown the number when we did is that we felt it important to answer the philosophical, the principal question first, because it has a major impact on budget, right? We could obviously make this year's budget as it stands right now, we could increase the amount that we were saving for the items that the mayor just mentioned by decreasing or not having that depreciation, that savings for the future in there. But I think we're all in agreement that that saving for the future is a fundamental principle that we ought to be adhering to here in the city. So with that now, as we take a look at budgets, it has an impact on where we are with budgets in various departments and how, what are the possibilities for allocation? And then we have additional questions that we have to ask. Is that 7% sufficient? Do we want to have truth in taxation for a higher amount? Or do we look at cuts not cuts, but yeah, budgetary cuts within the departments and look at reducing the expenditures within the departments so that we arrive at a point where we are doing all that we can not to have property taxes go up any more than what we had planned on, and also taking care of the individual departments and also moving forward in this savings. Does that make sense? Any questions up to this point? John?
I was just going to point out that we've thrown a couple numbers around, the 10.1, the 9.6 and just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, this number that we're talking about here anticipates cuts in budgets to meet that goal of the 500,000 for capital and the 445 for depreciation. Those numbers show up scattered, but the 500,000 is in this 1.3 at the bottom. But that's not what people have asked for. And you, as you council, you know, the department heads don't always get everything they ask for every year. But this is at least the direction that Jamie has come with, the recommendation of heading this direction because it accomplishes these goals. And obviously the reason we're asking this question is if we don't save for the future, then we have ways to spend the money, but the council should set the policy on what your plans are for the future.
Jamie, anything you want to add more? Okay. Mayor?
I would just add, Councilmember Swanson, I've been of the opinion that it's very frustrating to the department heads when we ask them how much they want. Then we tell them, sorry. I would propose, and I have been a proponent of saying, this is how much money you've got to spend based upon what's available, and let them ferret that out on what needs to be spent. You know, we've got to be very careful on salaries that's not a variable in each department budget, because otherwise it costs us more, as we've talked about many times, to hire somebody than to keep somebody. And so I'm a proponent, have been, and will continue to be a proponent of saying, here's how much money we've got to spend, and here's your allocation, and let them figure it out. Tied into the outcomes that we've talked about. It has to be tied into an outcome. So just going to throw that in again.
No, I think that's exactly where I think we are from a budgetary standpoint, is that we're in a place now in order to move forward for us to have the savings that we'd like to, that we're really looking at breaking from the tradition that's been the budgeting tradition that we've used here in North Ogden City for generations, right? Which has traditionally been what Mayor just described. What do you want? What do you need? And then we try to find a way to cover that. And of course, there's always some shaving and some things like that that have to happen. This is a different way of budgeting. And so I'll ask at this point in the discussion, do you have any questions about making a change to that type of budgeting, that process, where we're really looking at, I mean, right now we're looking at just over $500,000 difference between the 9.6 that we've worked into that budget and the 10.1, close to 10.2 that have been requested. Yeah, JD, excuse me.
I like JD.
Council Member Dalpaz.
So the difference between the 10.1 million number and the 9.6 million number, have we just cut a percentage from each department and that's where we got the number, or have we already gone in and, you know, looked at some things and said such and such department could do without whatever?
No, we
But
haven't.
it's just an across the board percentage cut, right?
What we've looked at is all the various departments that are listed there. Jamie's gone back and looked at the 4-year average. What percentage of our budget, though, that budgetary line traditionally takes over a 4-year average? We could look at police. It's what was it, John? 38 point something or something like that.
38.09.
09. Okay. And so then we applied that to this year's budget and that's what brings us to the 9.6, including the transfers, right? The 445 and the bond payment, right? Yeah. So that's how we arrived at that number. And then the requests from departments across the board are what got us to the 10.1, almost 10.2. So now we're at the juncture where we ask the question, what do we do at this point? Do we, as we've traditionally done, have a conversation where well, as Mayor described it, that what do you want? And we try to negotiate that out, or do we have just basically an allocation system? Or we've looked at it based on what we believe revenues are projected to be this year. Here's your 38.09% for police. And chief, that's your budget, and go forth and do with your budget.
Councilmember Swanson, I would be interested in the council's thoughts on, they feel comfortable increasing property taxes a minimum 7% this year, because that's the assumption in this budget. And if the council is uncomfortable with that, then that changes that $500,000 to $700 and some thousand dollars. So I'd be interested to know where the council stands on that, knowing what our citizens are faced with inflation, but so are our team members. They're faced with it too.
Right.
But I think we've almost got to back up to that point and say, is the council feeling comfortable with that? And then I'd like John to talk about a potential consumption opportunity instead of property tax. So Councilman Severin, if you call on your council members.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Just a quick explanation for those that, for everyone, just as a reminder. Remember that every year the county assessor's office will look at tax rates, and those tax rates are reduced so that the 100 homes that produced $1,000 last year, effectively those same 100 homes, even though values have gone up, those same 100 homes will produce roughly the same $1,000. And then there's growth from the new homes that are added in. What we had talked about a couple of years ago, and again last year, was a policy of maintaining our tax rate the same from year to year, so that property tax, the amount of taxes residents are paying would increase, though the rate was staying the same. And that requires a truth in taxation hearing. When we talk about this 7%, what we're talking about is that we would reduce the rate below where maintaining would be. What our current rate is, we would not maintain our current rate. It would actually come down, but it would not come down all the way to where the county assessor's office would establish that, and we all understand how that happens. So when we talk about a 7% increase, it's not a 7% increase in the rate. It's the home valuations that are going up that are normally that's accounted for and basically taken out through a drop in the rate by the county assessor. Go ahead, Mayor.
I think that's a good explanation, Phil. I would just state the council last year passed a philosophy. It shows you how things can change in the world, that we would maintain the rate.
Right.
That being the case, the portion of property taxes paid to North Ogden would probably go up somewhere in the 20%, because I believe our home increase prices have gone up in excess of 20%. So if we held to that recommendation by council last year, property taxes for the citizens would go up some 20%.
Yes.
For instance, if the average paid to North Ogden is $250, it would go to $300, right? Is my thinking correct?
Pretty good math for an accountant.
Yeah, well, I learned it from John.
Mayor.
Councilmember Severin, go ahead.
So what you're saying is that the average homeowner would pay an additional $50 per month or $50 per year
Yeah.
with this? Okay.
If we held the rate steady and let the
And just let the property value.
appreciation.
Right. And that would be closer to a 21% increase if we just held the rate steady. If you remember back, for those that were on the council, when we had that discussion, property home valuations weren't jumping like they are now. They were much more historically averaged and closer to what we had seen here for generations. Which would have meant that holding the rate flat would have been a pretty nominal 5, 6, or less percent increase each year in the amount of taxes that an individual homeowner would pay. But because home valuations are now in the 20 to 30% annually right now, you hold that rate flat, well, you have that corresponding jump in your property taxes. Your house, your assessed valuation goes up 25%. And you keep that rate the same, the amount that you pay is going to be up 25%, which is a pretty astronomical increase, and frankly, more than what the city requires in order to keep up with inflation. Remember also that as we've had our budgetary discussions, one of the things that has been missing for a very, very long time in North Ogden City's budgetary discussions is accounting for inflationary costs. Right, the cost of, even though the county keeps our property tax income roughly the same for the same number of homes, the cost to provide services to those homes continues to increase with inflation. So there has to be some bump that comes preferably regularly and in very small increments rather than, like the large increase that we had, 3 years ago? Was it 3 years ago? John, when was when we had the truth in taxation, we raised the rate? 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
Two?
But didn't we just maintain it?
Well, what we did, council member Swanson, is just to remind you, we transferred the $3 utility fee that was being paid. So last year was really the first out-of-pocket increase. That was 17%.
Right.
Last year. I would just throw out, how do we arrive at the 7%? At the time we began the budget process, that's what inflation was, the 7%. The Intermountain West now has jumped almost to 11%, which is the concern I think we all share, is most of our citizens are on an income that's not increasing to the tune of 11%, or in some cases even to 7%. So that eats into the standard of living. But that's how we arrived at the 7%, just for those who may be curious,
The Social Security.
is we just kind of looked at it and said, that was what inflation was when we began this process.
So let's have the discussion then on the 7%. Let's start down here with Councilmember Barker. Thoughts?
So while we're talking, I pulled up my tax data. Sorry.
All
This
choked
year.
up about it, huh?
Huh?
All
Yeah, I
choked
know,
up
I
about it.
can't breathe. So this year I
Especially
would,
when you see the fire districts.
it's the same as the cities. Going off what their tax rate is this year, I'd say I paid $429 to North Ogden City. And I live in a normal, I think, an average size home. 7% increase was an extra $30. So I go to $459. If we put real numbers, $30 to the North Ogden, I think that's a lot easier to grasp than to say we're gonna raise your taxes 7%, because if you look at your tax bill, there's a whole lot of things on there. We're not raising all of them,
Just the
just
North
North
Ogden.
Ogden City, and so I'm in favor.
Well, is the fire district going to raise their taxes? Because I know the county's already voted to raise theirs. I know the sewer district's raising theirs 20%.
District.
Is it in the budget? Are you anticipating because I think you must have an expensive home, because I only pay $275. And I think we computed the average to be about $250.
Double check you on that one.
Yeah, 1532 East. Check me out.
But yes, the fire district is gonna do, I think, similar 7%.
So here's my concern.
What?
We're 7%. Fire district 7%. County is 4.2%. Who knows what the school district will be? And I can tell you the sewer board's anticipating a 20% increase in their taxes. So when you calculate that on your case to be $30, you're right, that's what comes to North Ogden. But I think on your house with all the increases, you're probably going to be close to $100. Councilmember Parker.
But on the flip side, we've just said the county will still generate the same $1,000 for 10 homes, right? So if you don't keep your rates similar, we actually lose money.
Inflationary money.
And the school district will take more, and the sewer board will take more, and we lose. So you've got to sort of keep And I'm not an accountant, so I don't know how to explain this better, but if you do nothing, you actually go backward.
So you said you're in favor,
Yes,
and you're gonna check mayor's.
Yep. check his math.
He's looking up your tax.
Please do. I was gonna ask John to look it up. He's good at looking that up.
Right, Ryan's got it flowing right here. Councilmember Ekstrom, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I think we have not kept up as a council with, you know, the smaller increases, and now it's kind of eating, you know, biting us in the shorts. And now we're gonna have to have increases that probably are a little more uncomfortable. But you know, as Councilmember Barker pointed out, we don't take percentages to the bank, we take dollars. And when you actually look at the dollars and you know, divide it out, it's like, how much is that per month? You know, $30 increase. It's like, yes, and we are getting nickel and dimed everywhere, but it's kind of, you know, North Ogden has set a certain expectation for standard of living. And, you know, we take care of our
I don't know where to find it.
things, you know, and they've kind of been kicked down the road, and, you know, this depreciation thing where we haven't been saving where, you know, we should have been. Well, it's now time for a reckoning. And unfortunately, it's like, well, you know, this is principle-based decision-making. So yeah, it's like, we're gonna have to increase just as everything else is, because the cost of everything are going up. You know, we're seeing it in our business, we're seeing it at home, we're seeing it everywhere, and it's just, you know, part of life. You know?
So
I'm-
your feelings on the 7% then?
Yeah, I feel like we can either increase the rate, or we don't change the rates. Is that kind of what we're doing again? And we have to go do a truth in taxation where we leave
We
the rate
will
the
do
same?
a truth in taxation, but the rate will be much lower than if we just held it flat.
Okay,
If we just held the rate flat and didn't change, actually allow the rates lower, just not all the way down to where the county assessor would place it, we'd be looking at about a 20%, 21% increase
okay.
in what individual homeowners would be paying to North Ogden.
So I don't know if I take it even clear down to the 7%, I'd probably give us a little bit of a buffer there.
Okay.
So I would go down maybe 10% or something like that.
Councilmember Severin?
Can I correct myself first?
Yes.
So I can't do math. I left one of the numbers off. So my property taxes is going from 281 to 301,
So $20.
$20. Because I forgot, there's 2 ones in there, 0.00118. I just did 0.0018.
So the mayor was correct about his taxes.
He still pays more than me.
I think what he's looking for was that he was correct. It's not the amount, it's the.
But the amount, whether or not he's right.
Councilmember Severin.
I think it's our fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we're not only providing for now, but for the future. So I agree with Councilwoman Ekstrom that maybe we ought to reevaluate between that 7 to 10%.
Okay.
Because I would rather have us be maybe even putting in a little bit more as opposed to just hitting the minimum threshold. Especially if it's only going to be, you know, a 20, 25, 30, $35 difference in an annual tax. So if you break that down, that's $3 a month,
Okay,
which is more doable. So thank you.
let me get to Councilmember Galpass first. Councilmember Galpass.
So I'm worried about all of the different entities adding up to a large percentage for the average citizen. And that's what I'm most worried about is, you know, if we have a $20 per year increase for a North Ogden resident for our portion, for just the cities, and then fire is an X number, sewer is an X number, I'm really worried about all of those numbers, because I think that's what the bottom line is for the residents that they're gonna see. So even though we can feel good about increasing it because it's only a small amount in our entity, I'm not saying I have the solutions, because I do not immediately, to be honest, this is the first I'm hearing that our budget is in the situation that it is. So, I mean, I wouldn't be for a 7% increase, but I don't have the solution to what would be, what would be kicked down the road or what would be cut. So that's just kind of where I'm leaning right now.
Just a little devil's advocate for myself is, to what extent can we effectively subsidize the increases coming from the other entities, sacrifice service on our part, so that the impact from the other entities isn't compounded as much as it would have been? It's just a
Yeah.
philosophical question that I, like you, I don't have the answer. It's just a thought that runs through my head is, can we afford to do that from a service level here in North Ogden? Not provide the services to the level that we should be, in an effort to reduce the impact of taxes from other entities having on our residents. And I feel I'm right there with you on the cumulative impact that it has. That
Yeah,
all of those entities-
and I don't have an answer to that. Another thing that floats around in my mind is, we're talking about a 7% difference. Maybe we continue to look through the budget and find places that we can truly, without asking for huge sacrifices from any individual department, we get down to 4% or 5%, or which would still require a truth in taxation. But yeah, that's kind of,
The 7% that we're at now gets us to the 9.6 million, which is already, more than $500,000 less than the ask. Councilmember Ekstrom, you had something else you wanted to say?
I did. I just, I think we're still kind of catching up. Also, we have said as a city, public safety is our #1 priority. And so we have dedicated all of this property tax going to public safety, and it is not like, rob Peter, pay Paul. It's like, that's an accounting thing. That's like, okay, well then we have less coming out of the general fund going to police. But to me, I think this is still just working in the direction that I think makes sense as far as property taxes. If you own property in the city, you pay to have it protected. And so we're still very far from property taxes covering the police department operationally, not even, capital expenditure for the actual public safety building. So to me, that still philosophically for myself makes sense.
Councilmember Dalpas and then Mayor.
so I'm just thinking, the way that my mind thinks is each percentage is, so if we had an 11% increase, which is maintaining the rate, we're at that $10.1 million number, right? If we do 7%, which still requires truth in taxation, it's the 9.6. So it sounds like for every percentage, we're probably about $100,000 in the budget. Is that about right?
30 or 40.
30 or 40,000?
Yeah, what does the 7% generate? 210,
210,
so about
Okay.
30,000 for each percent.
So,
And if we maintain the rate flat, we'd be closer to a 21% increase.
Yep.
Just maintaining the current property tax rate as it is now.
okay. Yeah, so that's what kind of goes on in my mind when I hear each percentage that it's increased. I think of, if it's down to 5%, that's approximately 60,000 less within the budget as a whole. And I don't know how hard it is to find that in each and then, between all of the departments, but just kind of the way I'm thinking about it right now.
Okay.
I do not have the resolution. Trust me.
You should.
I know I should.
So go ahead, Mayor.
Let me just throw another twist into this.
Thanks.
John, what do you think is going to happen to public safety salaries over time?
They will continue to go up. And I think they will reach a point to where an individual who's starting as a public safety officer We'll probably be starting at $60,000-$70,000 a year. I just think that's, and I think because of that, departments will become more efficient, but that's the reality I think that we're going to see sooner than later.
And with that salary increase also comes benefits increases. The retirement and, you know, all that we have to apply to retirement and the others that come with the salary. So it's more than just the annual salary that will come to play in it. Hey, do you have something else you want to add? So council, the question then, we go back to the question of the process that we've been using to do our budgeting. My proposal is that we rip the Band-Aid off and we go right to the allocation method, where we look at it and, you know, right now we're looking at that 9.6 million. That includes the 7%. It allows us to have the 445 in depreciation. It covers the public safety bond. Understanding though that we got to do this all again next year. But at least that gets us right to that point, and we allow the experts that we have in our departments to run their departments with because really our responsibility stops at, okay, we figure out the budget. Right, that's our elected duty, is to be stewards of the finances. And I think John and the mayor and Jamie have done an excellent job of getting us to a point where now we can go to the departments with the allocations. What's the word? Explanable? Is that a word? I need somebody to just put a red underline that tells me that's not a word. It's spelled right, but it's not a word.
You can make up your own words too. But
Yeah.
it's really nice.
But I know there are word files out here that will correct me very quickly after the meeting. It's not a real word.
Not fun to scrabble.
But that's my proposal, council, is that it's for the good of the city now, for the good of the city long-term, for the good of our departments, for the autonomy of our departments. Over the years, in the 8 years that I've been here on council, and I'm sure I'll get some affirmative nods from department heads, it feels that council has stuck its fingers further and further and further into controlling the departments. And instead of them being us having our elected role as the fiduciary responsibility and allowing the experts that run our departments to run their departments. I think we move in that direction. I think we make some very good moves from a budgetary standpoint by going to this new method. Thoughts? That's my recommendation. Mayor, let's start with you. Your thoughts?
Well, I've always been a believer that expenses have to be paid out of revenues. I believe that, you know, we've got to look forward. And once again, not throwing anybody under the bus, but, you know, we kind of got where we're at today because we didn't make some of the tough decisions. I mean, it was nice, but we bragged we hadn't increased property taxes for what, 17 years? Which is great. I mean, we all enjoyed that, right? We all paid the taxes, but I'm one to say, unless we can figure out a different way to get revenues, we have to pay the expenses. And as I explained earlier in our meeting with you, Councilman Swanson, I'm concerned, we're considering here in this budget that building permits will stay at their current level. It's anybody's guess, but you know, you hear more talk about uncertainties, interest rates rising to 5%, costs going through the ceiling. Makes you wonder how long building can continue at its current pace. But yet we've built in, I think, 400,000 plus, pretty much, I think what we've had, right?
Yep.
John? So there's a lot of uncertainties out there that I think you know, I'd always like to be safe than sorry, but I think we work with the departments and see what we can do to allocate the funds that we have to spend based upon the council's strategy of having money available to keep North Ogden a great place to live.
Thoughts? Councilman Severin, we'll start with you.
So my thought just is, so what you're saying, just for me to be able to clarify in my mind, is that we are basically going to go back to the public works or the police department and say, this is how much you have, make it work.
Work with it. John, can you pull up that slide that had the 9.6? That one right there.
And yet, right now, we're based on the
The
request of
asks.
10-1, we have a request of 10,000,001 and a current budget of 9.6, right?
If we stick with the percentages, the 4-year average percentages by each of these lines that you see here, we're at 9,672. And what's the ask on 10-1 what?
Yes, 10-1 what?
Okay. I was just trying to see how close we were to 10-2, because round up to an easy, if it's closer to 10-2.
Councilmember Swanson, can I
Yes,
just
maybe.
throw in something too, as we ask the department heads to work within that budget. All those requests didn't necessarily come from each department. There are things that council members have requested to be in there that I think we made the commitment for. For instance, the sick leave buyout, we indicated once the economy, the uncertainties changed around, that we would reinstate that. So there's some things, fuel, they can't, you know, I'm wondering if there's some temporary adjustment in between the two. They can't control fuel, for instance. I mean, snow plowing and police, if fuel goes to $5, they can either sit in the parking lot or not snowplow the streets, which is one of the other questions. So I'm just throwing that out, that there's some things in there that are beyond their control. They can cut to that degree, but they didn't make those commitments or have
Right.
control over that.
And I think that's where the discussion that the comment that you made, Councilmember Ekstrom, that somebody else made it, I can't remember who, about Councilman Severin, I think it was you, that at least on the table for consideration is perhaps a lowering of the rate to where the increase is 9% instead of the 7%. Because of some of those things, Mayor, commitments that have been made that can't be cut at this point. So that's all part of the discussion that we need to have. John, can you bring back up that the PowerPoint slide again and go back to the questions? So one of the considerations that I've been pondering over the last few weeks and thinking about where the last 8 years, I look at some of the services that we provide, and we are providing excellent services. Our snow plowing, park maintenance, lawn care, streets, we do the best we can with the money that we have, knowing that the streets tend to degrade faster than we can keep up with them. I think one of the questions that is difficult for our department heads as they get whipsawed back and forth is, what are the minimum level, service level expectations that we have of the city as a city for snow plowing? David, when I was first on council 8+ years ago, it took us 8 to 10 hours to clear the city, right?
Yes, sir.
And what are we doing in now?
About 4.5.
About 4.5, right? So that service level is tremendous and wonderful, but it's come at a cost, right? We have many more trucks than we did at the time. There are costs so we have to ask those questions. What's the minimum level expectation that we have for various services within the city and the cost associated? And then if we choose as a council to exceed those minimum expectation service levels, we have to ask ourselves, how do we fund that? Where does that come from? And that question typically is one that we then turn and ask the public. We can do snow plowing in 3 hours. But at this cost, and this is the impact that you have. So this hierarchical discussion that we've been having for the last month, this is part of kind of the meat and potatoes of that discussion. As we look at these services that we provide, what are the minimum expectations at which we can currently provide those things? That makes sense to everyone? And then if there's an expectation or a desire for those services to be increased, then we can have that financial discussion. So as you are visiting with your respective departments for which you are the liaison, this is the kind of conversation that we need to be having. Does that make sense with everyone?
Mhm.
Thoughts, comments? Mayor, I see you scribbling away there. What's your thinking?
I was scribbling away. I think there's two things in there. One, that we made a commitment to the employees on the sick leave buyout.
Yeah.
I believe that was 75,000, John. We talked about an increase of fuel of, was it 55,000, John?
Yep.
That's $130,000. Right there.
And
The
that's with fuel at 450 again? or
I
is
think it
that
was
at
a 5.
Did we calculate that at 5? Okay, so it's less than what it is currently. But close. Okay.
So,
Some of our diesel, right?
That's right.
And five is, you gotta think about it, because we don't pay some taxes, so like, when you see 550, you'd be seeing like 550 as like the market before when we pay 5. So,
Right.
I don't know what our mix is between gas and diesel. But, so just assuming those two things are out of the control of the department heads, I just did a quick dirty calculation there. Just to cover those would be increasing the rate from 7% to 11.5%. Councilman Dalpaz, that's at a $30,000 percentage. Just to cover those things would require the post property tax increase to go to 11.5%.
If we keep the depreciation correction and also cover the bond payment as we discussed.
Yeah, that's all in the budget, right? So we made the commitment that the bond comes out first because we wouldn't be increasing taxes to cover the bond. We had that covered. So if you wanted to leave those two things in, take it from 9.6 to 9,750 or whatever that number would be. That's what you'd have to do with property taxes. Otherwise, you're asking them to cut for the fuel increase, but you know, maybe they'd rather do something else than buy out sick leave. I don't know. That'd be their call.
Councilman Delpas.
I mean, I know between Jamie and the mayor and John and everyone that's been going down this discussion and kind of knows the numbers really well, I think we need to put a lot of trust in them. I mean, if the mayor tells me and if Jamie tells me that 7% is like the minimum and we're not scrimping too much, but it's enough that some places are making some small sacrifices, but it's enough to keep us in a good place, then I'm leaning towards being okay with that. So I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm the guy that's holding everyone back saying that but I do want to look through all the items a little bit more to make sure there isn't some places that maybe there are some obvious places that we could have some savings that we didn't see previously. Because coming into this, I didn't know we were going to be having this conversation. In my mind, we were doing really well on sales tax revenues and, you know, things were looking really good. But it seems like this finding the depreciation issue that we've found and we're trying to correct, that's put a wrench in things. But what I'm trying to say is I want to put some more trust in the mayor and JB to say, if that's the minimum, we should go with that.
When I opened my email a couple of days ago and I saw that depreciation number, yeah, it was a big wrench to kind of like the movie Dodgeball, right? If you can catch a wrench, you can catch a ball. Well, it was a big wrench and it smacked me right between the eyes, and wasn't expecting that. So it's changed how we have to think.
And Councilmember Delpez, I'm gonna throw that back to you. As you know, I've contacted just about every member on the council. And this is a different approach. That's why I want you to be involved. And asked you to be making the presentations on behalf of your departments with support from the departments. Because it'll be your responsibility to figure out how to make that work along with them in the department, then convince the council. So that's the involvement I anticipate from council members, that they've been given an assignment and you're gonna have to work with your folks to determine how to make it happen. And then convince the council that's what they can work with.
So Mayor, can I make a comment?
Yes, Councilmember Severin.
So in other words, trying to picture what this is gonna look like, being the liaison for the police department. So we're gonna say, okay, police department, you have, and I'm just using easy numbers, but here's $100,000, make this work. That what we're saying, basically? Because I mean, I'm looking at the police budget. The police budget is 3.6 right now. We only have $2,020,000 in property taxes, with another 20,000 that's delinquent. So we compensate that with sales tax. Wow. I guess in my mind, I just worry, I don't want a department head to feel like we're we don't want to cut back services. And we asked them to be very, very cautious last year. Now this discovery of the depreciation issue seems to be even more haunting than last year. So I just would never want any of the department heads to feel like we're trying to be too stringent, but obviously we've got an error, so.
Well, and the other piece to consider in that too is that the finances is our responsibility as council. And we're taking a different budgeting approach than we have in the past. And like any good council, which I think we have a really good council right now, and an incredible mayor and finance director, we're in a position to work this. And I think we also have the kind of individuals that if there's a problem, we'll step in and we'll fix it. All right, we're not going to just let the ship go down because we've decided that we have theorized that this is a better way to go. We really won't know until we take a chunk out of the cake and see what happens.
Well, I think it's a good course correction. Sadly, it's a good course correction, and I don't think we have much of an option. So
I think Councilman Dalpaz hit it on the nail on the head when he said we have great trust in Jamie and great trust in Mayor, both very accomplished and very skilled CPAs and financial brains, far beyond mine. And I agree that we have to trust the analyses that they've done and the recommendations that have been made, and we move forward from there. Any other thoughts before we move on? Councilman Larker?
I'm actually a fan of allocating to each department.
Okay.
I think it makes it easier because previous years we've had department heads come with their requests and then we get to decide what's important. And how do we know what's important?
We're not the expert.
Right, so this way, when we give our department heads their allocation, say, make it work, they know what's important and they can make it work. I think it's easier for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Extra.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I can't be the one deciding what Dave needs. I don't have any idea. You know what I mean? So when we spoke yesterday and I gave him the charge to divide up all of the things that he wants to do and needs to do into the quadrants of, Stephen Covey. Is it urgent and important? All of them are important. What's the most urgent? And then we work down from there. And just as we have done to get a prioritized list. So are there things, yes, that this really needs to be done, but does it really have to be done right now? Or do we have a little bit of time? Do we have some leeway? In which case then, if he has, okay, you've got this much money, then he gets to choose what's the most important and the most urgent. As opposed to us trying to like say, oh, I like that, you know, then it becomes a little more, what's the word? But it's subjective. It's subjective to what we want. You know, it's like, oh, I like that thing, as opposed to what is needed for each of the departments. They know, they're the ones that are having to do this every day. They're the ones that have to actually run the city. So, you know, for us, our responsibility is good policy and good money management. And the rest is, okay, they're good at what they do, you know, and I've been very impressed with our department heads to try and find good deals on things and not, you know, get the most expensive thing. They're getting bids there, and you know, they know what they're doing. They've been at it for a long time too. So, you know, I really like this approach. I like the allocated funds approach for a percentage of which is going to which departments and based on priorities. I think that takes just a lot of the guesswork out of it, a lot of the subjectivity out of it. And, you know, I think that's a doable way to go.
Okay. Any other comments? Yeah, sure. That's what we're here for.
I think we all agreed that the public safety is like one of the #1 priorities for us as a city council. I think it's been pretty obvious over the last at least year that we've prioritized that. And so I guess one concern that I do have is if we're going across the board and we're saying instead of this 10.1 million budget, we're doing 9.6. So the police department is essentially impacted at the same percentage that all of the other departments are. That I'm a little uneasy with that in a way. So I'm not saying I know the solution, but if we are impacting the police's budget at the same rate that planning and building and those others are, it worries me a little bit. Maybe there should be something built in to support the police a little bit more.
Mayor,
One of the things that we, in the type of budgeting that we're looking at doing as we have that conversation and we're looking at outcomes, right? Having a budgetary impact on a department doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome will be negatively impacted, right? It might mean that by having this cut, and we'll just use public safety as an example, that having that equalized impact means that instead of going from the 5th safest city in the state to the 3rd safest, that we remain at the 5th safest city in the state. Which is an impact, right? It is an outcome impact, but we have to ask ourselves, is that a livable impact? Can we live with staying at 5th safest instead of advancing to 3rd safest this year? And that's just a, you know, a pie in the sky hypothetical kind of thing. But that's really the thinking that we're trying to get to on a regular basis as we look at, it's not just, is there a monetary cut, and a monetary cut means bad things. It may mean that we can stay at an acceptable good level or a great level of service that we're currently at now, and we're just not going to advance that a little bit further this year. Does that make sense?
In lieu of the depreciation problem.
In lieu of taking care of a depreciation problem and those other things.
Yeah, but from what I saw on the police department, we feel pretty comfortable that we're not, you know, we're not making it much more difficult for them, right? Because didn't we show that we were adding an additional officer halfway through the year?
Right.
And also adding the community service officer into the budget as well, right? So I guess from that perspective, we're definitely not, okay.
Right. But that's the conversation that we have to have with the departments, right? And the analysis that has to be done is, what are those outcome impacts? Right, that helps inform the decisions that we're making, so that it's not just based on it's a cut, so it has to be negative. It could be a cut and it's neutral. and we're already at a really good place, so there's a reduction and we remain neutral. Mayor.
You know, it'd be interesting, on the discussion with police, for instance, the dollar amount difference between this year and last year, and Councilmember Dalpaz, I think you brought up a good point. We've had this discussion. And I think that's why Councilmember Swanson has asked us for prioritization. You know, we talked about, you know, do we increase the percentage from 30, the historical percentage on public safety? Do we increase that by some percentage? Do we do something like that in public works, which are the two top priorities? What that results in then is effect on other departments, right? Parks, recreation probably is a big one. But we have had that discussion, and I think it's worth having. You know, is it a cut equally? And I think Councilmember Swanson's remarks made a lot of sense. But we do have the option to adjust those percentages before we allocate the money out. We've had that discussion. So if we really feel that we need a 23rd officer, that we, I inquired, for instance, about changing the full-time admin staff from part-time. Well, the new laws passed by the legislature require a lot more work in providing information to the defendant than we historically have had in regards to reviewing body cams and things of that nature. They're entitled to that without even asking, according to what John mentioned, I think, if I understood you correctly.
Yep.
Particularly in higher level crimes. So somebody has to go through that and you know, get that in order and et cetera. So some of these things are mandated by recent laws that were passed. But John, what is the difference in the dollars, for instance, in the police department, if we allocate the 9.6 in dollars compared to the prior year?
So it's a little, police is a good example. It's this column here. What was budgeted for them for the current day we're in was 3.2 million. This would actually be an increase up to 3.6 million for them. And then if they got everything they asked for, it would be 3.9.
But John, part of that 3.6 is the allocation from motor pool, right?
Right.
Depreciation like $200,000.
It's the things that are outside of the chief's control.
So you really would see an increase of maybe 200. But you can see the dollar in comparison. For instance, you know, admin's not good because it's broken out separately, but nobody gets really substantially less dollars. If I'm understanding right, for instance, if you look at planning, their dollar increase would be 30, or is it that one? Is it the 37,000?
You're right, Mayor. It is this.
Yes, the 37,000. So planning would get $37,000 more at 9.6, right? So it's not like they're getting significant dollar cuts in their budget. Although I can tell you a good portion of that increase is eaten up by maintaining market rate salaries.
Now, a part of this, a part of the entire formula here that is always a part of the discussion is if it is felt by council and by residents that the cuts are too deep, then we have a property tax increase that's also can be worked into the, I think this gives us much better color and vision than what we've had in the past, to look at all options that are on the table. And certainly I'm not advocating for or recommending that we, you know, that we have all these property tax increases. But I think this gives us the vision and the granularity that we need to look at individual lines, individual departments, where we are with what we are anticipating coming in, and then making decisions based on that. understanding that if we feel that there's insufficient revenue, that there's always the dark cloud of tax increase. And sometimes having that dark cloud there helps us let's clarify the priority in our minds. How important is this? Is it important enough for me to go to the residents and ask for a tax increase? Sometimes we can get caught up and say, well, I think we really need to have this, until we ask that question. Is it really important enough for us to go to the residents and say, we're going to have a truth in taxation and we're going to ask for more money from you? Is this, and I think the common term is this pet project or this pet, whatever it is, important enough that I think we should go to the citizens and ask for more money? That we've done all the efficiencies and the trimming that we possibly can, and the only way to make this happen is to raise taxes. And I think that question is a very powerful and weighty question, as it should be, in coloring and really restricting the things that we decide are important and necessary to do.
John, just one other number. What's the actual dollar increase in funds this year versus last year?
You're talking this general fund total?
Yes.
So it's convoluted because there's CARES Act money and other things that are thrown in there. Jamie, do you know the
2.4.
2.4?
Yeah, so it's 900, it's like 600,000. I think this year is 900,000 or 900 million. 9 million.
900 million.
All right.
Wow, hey, budget's galore, let's go.
400,000 is depreciation. So really there's a $200,000 increase in budget. And I appreciate your comments, Councilmember Swan. So I'm going to call on John just to throw out another potential idea on revenue generation that is consumption related. We've had that discussion, John, or is that off the table now?
So we've talked about exploring the options of a consumption tax, which is basically an increase of a local option sales tax. There are restrictions tied to that, and we don't know whether we even could or what the process would be, but we can explore that option, talk to the Utah Tax Association, or not association, but the commission, and see what the rules are. But the tax code is very fun. You can spend hours reading that.
But we do know other cities in the county have taken that approach.
Yeah, so Riverdale, I have the list here in Weaver County. Riverdale uses it, as does, well, Falcon Hill and Riverdale. But there are several cities in the state who do it's a 0.2% local option sales tax that is utilized.
So that's in the background of our minds as an option that I think for this year we budget. And then next year's budget, that's something that we can consider implementing. And
Well, John's going to investigate that to see what the possibilities are. I've always favored more of a consumption tax. Those who use it pay versus the property tax. And don't get me wrong, I understand the need for that, but I just get concerned that, that's based upon a home value that people have no control over. But if it's a sales tax increase, people pay that as they purchase. It's more of a how they consume. But John's going to look into that last week and I'm just kidding.
isn't his report on that next thing?
It is actually, it was on the agenda for them to report on that next. But if that's a possibility, we ought to just look into it.
Yeah.
And see, because that would generate probably adequate revenues. We kind of did we don't have a foreshore number, but it would be very, very helpful to the budget process.
So I think this, Councilmember Shepherd.
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
There's so many numbers going through my mind.
You got them all, right?
What's that?
You got them all.
There's a test.
No, Yeah, there's a test at the end. Well, I'm already trying. So, I understand how to take care of my business. I know how to take care of my family budget. But there's just so many numbers going through my mind. So because of this depreciation issue, we're looking at, and I'm just restating, okay? So we're trying to take $445,000 a year for the next 4 years to make up for what was lost in the last 4 years.
No,
No.
what we're trying to do is, the 445 should have been happening yearly. We're saying today we're gonna start doing it. And
Okay.
every year moving forward, we're going, not to make up.
We're
for
not trying to
past
make
years.
up for
This
something
is
going forward.
for eternity.
Okay,
to
so,
properly save for the future.
okay. Thank you. That's what I just needed to clarify.
But I do agree. I'd like to get more understanding because this is kind of new, I think, to all of us. It kind of popped up. So I'll make the commitment. I trust Jamie. I just want to gain more understanding about, how that works and get a better understanding of the motor pool. But I can tell you, we've kind of understated the motor pool for years, what the costs are. And I think Jamie's done a good job of investigating how that should be allocated. It's actually based upon what the folks in the motor pool are spending their time on. I think you said was a third of it was on police.
Part of their time is used to
So
maintain
she's done a lot of research and it's got some good basis on allocation. So
So it affects my department.
Yes.
well, yes.
Because I've already met once with, a couple times with the chief, but he mentioned this and so this is going to be a good learning experience for me.
Great.
Just in conclusion here, and then we can talk about next steps. The principle of equal allocation across all departments for, say, the motor pool is easy to manage, right? And it's just fundamentally simple, but it doesn't accurately reflect the impact individual departments have through the motor pool. And as we get more complex and as we properly account for things, the impacts from a particular department should be felt by that department and not subsidized by the other departments. And I think that's where we're going. And we are taking rip the Band-Aid off the very fresh wound approach. And it will be tender for a while as we make these changes, but ultimately it will be for the good of the residents. And that's what we're here to do. So next steps, when is our next meeting, Jamie?
Do you have the calendar? I
John,
believe
can you
it's
pull that
April
calendar
12th.
back up again?
April 12th, and we'll be doing all the enterprise funds and admin presentations.
Okay. So you'll see that those of you that are responsible for any of the enterprise funds, can we get all this information out to all of the council members so that they can be looking at these numbers?
Yes, yes.
And so that they can be prepared to start having those conversations and be prepared for April 12th. So April 12th, council members, who of you have enterprise funds in your portfolio? Councilmember Ekstrom? Is it just you, Councilmember Ekstrom,
I
Public
think
Works?
so, yeah.
Okay, so it's the David and Councilmember Ekstrom show on
Okay.
April 12th. But if you can get this information out so that everybody can be preparing for their respective responsibilities and we can move forward. And, I've asked John and Jamie questions and they're very gracious to answer. And if they can dumb it down for me, they can certainly dumb it down less so that you guys can understand it. Okay? Jamie, anything you'd like to add?
Looks like
And then we'll
John-
head down there.
Oh, I do have one other thing to add, but it might be at a different time.
Okay,
I think it might be the financial presentation.
okay. John,
So also, we were gonna do the admin, which is human resources, recorder, everything in this building. So that incorporates at least 2 more of you for April 12th.
okay, and who are those council members?
That's the mayor
Mayor and
Building and finance.
and building.
JD, yeah.
Me. You just tell me it's good. Yeah. I'm a new guy. You got to spell it out for me.
Forewarned, you have time to prepare.
Yeah.
Well, and the instruction to the department heads has been to work with liaisons to create the presentation and support during the presentation, but the council will be leading the discussion and talking about, again, those deliverables.
Wonderful. Okay, Mayor, I think that concludes this for tonight.
I think that concludes the night, if you ask me. But we will move on to item number 7.
Would you entertain a motion to postpone the rest of the items to another night so that we can digest what we just were fed?
Well, that would be good, but I think we have some other important items that our planning group has prepared that need an answer to. So we will move on to item number 7. And thank you, Councilmember Swanson, for leading that discussion. Very complicated, but very important. So now we'll have a discussion on the general plan future land use map. I did get some communication that we've lost. I don't know if we're back on, John, with people online being able to see what's going on.
So there's a conflict. The video did shut off, but sharing screen and the video are always competing with each other. So I put it on just the council for a few minutes since we weren't referencing any documents.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that those who had commented knew we'd received their communication. So Mr. Hess, our planning director, is going to discuss the general plan future land use map with us.
All right, thank you, council. If you remember back to end of last year and the beginning of January, we paused work on the general plan future land use map, waiting out the 45-day legislative session with a number of the questions that we had leading up to that. Really, Senator Waldrop's bill that ended up being, I think, less impactful to local governments than we initially thought it was going to be. There were some discussions around the legislature about taking away local decision-making around multifamily housing and doing reasonability tests or balancing across the region, which would mean you're given a set number of units that you have to build to or a set number of moderate income housing units. And that ultimately didn't pan out. So what we saw in the legislative session this year was updates to the moderate income housing plan, which we were, I think, expecting to convert the language into more of an implementation language. And what we're going to do there, we have until October 1st to address that. And then similar to every other year, we have a laundry list of land use elements to tackle. So we've got some noticing changes and some other things unique this year. We've got water planning, kind of took a highlight. So in our actual zoning codes and ordinances, the city, not that we were doing this, but the city and homeowners associations cannot require landscaping that is strictly grass in areas less than 8 feet. So that basically means everybody in the city can rip their strip. By state code now, you can eliminate those. We can provide alternatives. So we can talk about what kind of rocks and cobbles and whether or not concrete can go in there. There's the things that we can still do as a city, but we can't require just grass. And then the other is, this is new for everybody in the state, but water is part of your general plan. So we have until 2025 to address long-range planning for water, the same way you would think of long-range planning for land uses, transportation, housing, that sort of thing, which ultimately I think is going to be a really good thing. It'll help us answer questions about timing for annexations and development coming in. So with that mini legislative preview, I'm bringing back forward to you the general plan land use map. So we have a recommendation, a positive recommendation from your general plan advisory committee, the citizen-led committee that ultimately went to the planning commission, and they have provided a positive recommendation with some caveats about neighborhood commercial and whether or not we should include those locations. And as a reminder, the map that you see with the little red areas, the asterisks that are neighborhood commercial or other commercial areas within the city were retained on the map so that the legislative body can see the map as it was made whole, with the understanding the planning commission had some concerns about some of those internally located commercial areas within the city. So really just wanted to bring this back in front of you, answer any questions that you have. We've got a few short slides that we can go through after if there's any questions, or I can do those now, and then take feedback and decide what the next steps are so that we can ultimately hopefully adopt this.
Council, what questions may you have? This is obviously a very important decision here. I think in the packet, as you read it, the basis for this is pretty much the 2015 general plan with a few overlays. Scott, could you just take a short minute? I think you had a slide that kind of talked about the
various
changes, from where we were.
So we'll start in the city center area that's kind of purple on this map, and we'll rotate sort of around the city from there. So there were some increases in the area that were considered downtown for the city. Some of those were kind of strategically located, like this number 1 to the lower right there. That's an area of 5,000 square foot lots that to me represents a housing type that is compatible and adjacent to services and civic services, parks, that sort of thing. So we wanted to basically capture this so that when the definition of what does the downtown area mean, it means all those types of housing types that include this 5,000 square foot lot. There was a slight expansion to the downtown area between Loman View and Pleasant View Drive that bumps right up against the current, the new public works site. This is an area where we've worked now with a developer to right here actually to create a small lot, single family zone that we just looked at. That's the John Hanson project, the Century Farm. That's going to look a lot like this, but without a homeowners association. And then we looked at areas of the city that are still expanding. So this number 3 here is combination of north of Village of Providence Point, but includes Patriot Point. So that's a master planned community zoned project that's currently building out. So this is really highlighting and aligning the general plan to what the underlying approved land uses are. Number 4, this is the South Town Center, Kings Plaza, it's Kurtz Drive-In and Cannery area. That's a focus for the city on some redevelopment, potentially looking at that from a holistic use, what it should be in the future, make sure it's really productive commercial, and then also, you know, what the housing mix of that area would look like. That's where we received the grant from Wasatch Front Regional Council to study. So we'll be looking at that in the future. And then really addressing moderate income housing over time. We have a fairly large expansion of the area that staff and General Plan Advisory Committee and Planning Commission was considering for more of a multifamily housing. And that's the southwest quadrant of the city. Majority of this number 6 here is not annexed into the city right now, it's county, and our boundary line with Harrisville is pretty well set with what we can and can't provide services to. So there's no overlap in that annexation declaration. But this whole area brings to light that water planning, for instance. You know, we've got water projects that are needed to serve those rooftops. We've got some probably delay in timing between when the city is ready to provide culinary water to specific rooftops. And depending on the total density in there, that's going to change the level of those capital improvements that we make. I'll skip over the commercial pods right now and jump to these number 9 areas. It's a little difficult, but using the 2015 as the baseline, all of this black hatch area here was called conservation. And the conservation went into these areas that are like number 9. So Barker Park was called out for conservation. This is Northwood Hills, an existing subdivision. So we went through it, staff went through at a parcel level and looked at areas where conservation is just no longer possible. You have existing single family homes. These are legal subdivisions, good neighbors, good areas of the city. But our opportunity for collecting, say, open space, increased open space during the development process is gone. We can't do it anymore. So we've pulled that back. We've been a little more strategic on what is and isn't the conservation area, really leaving the outer boundaries the same, but eliminating those areas that appear to us that we have opportunity for conservation that we don't. And then we've got the little nodes of commercial. So you've got one down here on 1700, another here. This is the gateway of the city. Fruitland Drive, corner of Fruitland Drive and Mountain Road. Potential for one up off of 2600 going east. It doesn't necessarily have to be located right there on Barker Park. And then John, if you'll go, there was an idea from Planning Commission about one here going out the Ogden Divide Road, and then there's one even further up on what would be Future Mountain Road as it curves up and exits the city. I know you all read the 300 pages of Title 11 and 12 reorganization, so you'll know that we now have a neighborhood commercial possible zone. It doesn't locate anywhere on the map, but we do have provisions for neighborhood commercial. It's very restricted in what uses it could go into it. It's limited to a 25-foot tall height, so it's smaller than our single family homes. Retail establishments smaller than 10,000 square feet. Those are your normal like 4-bay wide, 2,500 square foot per business. Restaurants that are not drive-throughs, medical offices, that sort of thing. You know, you might get a title company, something like that. So we have a limited list currently of what would constitute neighborhood commercial. If we were to take any of these areas from the general plan and then actually zone them through a legislative process, having them on this map doesn't necessarily mean you have to accept them. It's a starting point for a list of what neighborhood commercial needs for North Ogden.
Does that give you some insight, council, on the changes basically from 2015? I made a few notes here. I think this was in the packet as I went through it. I would prefer that we not identify neighborhood commercial specifically. We have an ordinance that allows that. But I think someone's going to come along after us and say, oh, this was the approved location. I would prefer that we just have that in the land use code. It's interesting. Every time that I've been here, one of the questions is, does this follow the general plan? Apparently that hasn't been too important if we had all this stuff set as conservation and now there's houses all over it, right? So I think that's important for the council to understand as they approve this, that we'd actually talked about vesting these zones at one point in time. And so when that question's asked, is this council going to say, that's what the general plan says, but we're going to ignore it? I think that's a question that needs to be asked. And I'll just state this again in case I haven't made it clear before. I don't think we've had great success with any of our MPC zone projects this point in time, and I'm a little bit leery of continuing to have that out there as a going forward option until we get our hands around what we've got, because we haven't really got our hands around what we've got. Just my comments. So Councilmember Dalpaz, let's see what comments you have.
We've had your presentation before and the recommendation from the GPAC, but so I feel like we're really close to being able to, I know we're not acting on it tonight, but I feel like when you do bring it back, I do feel like we're going to be ready to make a decision and officially approve it. How does, remind me, how does the multi-housing conversation in the RCC apply to so 1A is an overlay, but can you just remind me, since we recently had a conversation of the multifamily being included in the RCC as a whole, can you just talk to 1A, please?
Yeah, so 1 is comprised of multiple zones, actually. There's commercial in there, R5, R15, RCC, R18 AG, and some R18, depending on how you go up the hill. So it would be, these are some potential zones that are permitted in this area based on its general land use mix. The thing that is specific in this recommendation is that it suggests that RCC be permissive of two-family dwellings again, so duplexes. And then that 1A area that reaches up north, that touches Washington Boulevard, 400 as it runs up the hill, up to Ben Lomond Cemetery, and then that one block removed down would be an overlay over those two zones, which are R18 and R18 AG, that would be permissive in that area of two-family dwellings.
Okay, I just know that we've had a lot of conversation about it and citizen feedback both ways. So I just want to make sure we make a really good decision on that 1A overlay swath.
Yeah, I'll share back with the council again and make sure you have, each one of these land uses comes with a recommended list of zones. So you have general land use, general nebulous land, like land areas, and then you have specific zones that could land within them. And that's the piece that when staff brings forward an R4 rezone in the RCC and we're supportive of it, it's because the general plan outlines that this is a land use that can land here. And I think that that's the piece of the conversation you should really be focusing on is that area of the city ready for, right for, or correct for R2, R3, R4, what specific zones we have available in the city.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, Councilman Delpaz. I do think that, you know, to your point, we would have to approve that change in the RCC zone, even though it's an overlay there. So we will have opportunity for future discussion separate from this map once, because we have to make sure we're okay with the zoning
Right.
as outlined. Councilman Severing, do you have any questions or comments?
I don't, just appreciate what you've done so far.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ekstrom, do you have anything to add to the conversation?
Don't, again, just appreciate all the work, because that's a lot of work. You know, thanks to the General Plan Advisory Committee, thanks to Scott and Brandon and all the put in the hours of drawing maps. You know, it's, you know, I just went to a conference on Saturday and we were talking about drawing maps for boundaries where that's for, you know, congressional zones and things like that. And all of the work that went into do it. And then the legislature threw them out the window. So, you know, there's a lot of thought and a lot of just creative resources that go into doing something like this. And so I just want to make sure that it's acknowledged and appreciated. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Swanson, I know this is of great interest to you. Do you have anything, concerns or additions to the proposed map? Because it will be brought back fairly quickly for approval.
I think we've gotten to a really good place and really appreciate the passion, Stephanie, in particular, that you've brought to this committee. And it's been a heck of a process, right?
Yes.
It's been a heck of a process, and I appreciate your dedication and what's the word I'm looking for? Perseverance. Yes, that's perfect. Yes, perseverance in seeing this through. You've done excellent work there. But no, I don't have, my only concern would be especially with the commercial pods, that we look at that very closely. Granted that, you know, it's in that 390,000 page document that you guys try to read, and but locations and I think also the types of businesses that would be allowed need careful scrutiny before we go too far.
So that is in the chapter 11 and 12. I think there is a zone in there.
Yeah.
My concern is just pre-locating where those would be. Councilmember Barker, do you have anything?
That was my only suggestion, is they're allowed, so let's not put them on the map where they're allowed.
Okay, thank you. Scott, could you just point out for me where we have conservation areas, just so I'm clear on that in this map? Because I think it's important. I would just point out while you're doing that, as we've talked, we have talked about increased ability to put more homes on acreage in exchange for open land. So I think that's a different approach, even in some of these zones. we would be seeking open space even within some of the development of these zones based upon negotiating units per acre.
Right.
So could you just point out here, just so we're all clear on what we're still looking at as some degree of conservation?
Sure. So one thing to say is that the areas on the map, I wouldn't say preclude the council from having the discussion or asking the question to developers. If they're coming in for an upzone from RE20 to R110, R112.5, whatever, of saying, you know, what's the trade-off here? What are we getting? But the areas of conservation that were considered in 2015 and supported now are Lowman View Drive being aligned to the north with there's a handful of properties here that are undeveloped that touch Washington Boulevard, and then down Pleasant View Drive on kind of that central northwest area of the city. So that's historically larger lots, and when I say larger lots, I mean several acres, and there's some historic farm homes there. And this is an area where the city provided R12.5 to the Pheasant Landing development that went north between those, just north from the public works site off of Lowman View Drive up to Alberta. We didn't really get anything for that R120, RE20 to R12.5, but I think as you look back on those decisions, R12.5 was some level of conservation as opposed to letting it go R15 or multifamily. So, you know, we can still look at those as wins of supporting single family homes. And then the other piece is this really central eastern portion of the city that has, 20, 30 acres swaths in one location or more, longstanding farmland, alfalfa fields, things that are iconic for North Ogden still, fruit orchards. And what do we do to preserve those? And these are areas that when a rezone application does come in, and these are all mixed zones. It's not like this is perfectly RE20 and there's all sorts of stuff in there, that we have the conversation with the developer about what level of density makes sense and makes sense to meet the needs of the city and future residences and our build out, but also preserves the inherent character of the community. So those two areas specifically are called out. And then this number 11 is hillside protection. I think there's future discussions to be had up there, but we know we have a development agreement that has a ceiling set for a number of units up on land owned by one particular property owner that owns a lot of land up there. And any sort of amendments to that or recommendations for amendments to that, I would hope come with some significant open space trade-offs. So.
All right. Anything else, Scott, you'd like to add?
No, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Thanks to you and the committee for your great work. And I would just make sure that we still have some work to do on the general plan and simplifying that. This is just one portion of the general plan. And that we get a couple of members from the current committee to help with the wording and make those necessary changes to the general plan. I don't know if we still have the bridge over troubled waters, but things like that need to be addressed in addition to. So, okay, thank you very much for your work. All right, we'll go on to item number 8. Our presenter will be John Call. He's going to talk to us about xeriscaping, and we've had a lot of questions about this coming our way in regards to the water situation and where we're at. I would just remind that we don't have control over secondary water in the city. Our concentration has to be on the use of our culinary water, and maintaining that is very important to our city. So John, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So there's two parts of this discussion. One is bringing back what we talked about last year when we did the first emergency declaration, and that is creating an ordinance that encourages xeriscaping. The idea being it's not a requirement, but that we encourage it. And from I know from planning as well as the engineering standpoints and public works, they're looking at ways to on all of our projects implement it, as well as encourage it on new development and things like that. Obviously, the state code doesn't allow us to force grass anymore, which is one of those water intensive landscaping methods. But this language here just basically goes through and identifies, hey, it's important, we care about it. Here's some things. It's not as expansive as some municipal ordinances. If you look at Salt Lake City's ordinance, it is intense because it focuses so much on the right mix of aggregate and plants, and that's not what this language intends to do. This language basically intends to promote beautiful landscaping that's water conscious in a way that integrates with our current landscaping that we see throughout the city. This ordinance has also, I tried to make sure I didn't tweak anything that was in this section. This is what the police department has, or the code enforcement department has said this really works well for them. We added this earlier last year, if I remember right, basically focusing on how we decide if it's something that code enforcement needs to be involved in. One thing that often comes up, my sister, one of her favorite stories is when she lived in Salt Lake City. The code enforcement showed up at her house and said, you need to mow your lawn or cut down your weeds. And she said, well, weeds are unwanted plants and all plants are welcome in my yard. So we have seen some of that in the city, but our code enforcement has been very good on working with individuals. And in fact, walked the property with one individual, this is probably 3 years ago, and they were actually growing intentional plants for medicinal purposes or other, making soaps and things. And so they actually had a very conscientious, whatever, Phil, I need a word, a red line under. The idea being that they were intentionally growing things that looked like weeds to their neighbors, but it was actually planned out. And so code enforcement worked on a few of the things that weren't planned and let them continue their other activities. But so from a philosophical standpoint, the question is, as the council, as you reviewed this, is there any place you felt like we needed more language, more emphasis, less emphasis? I'm getting a lot of shaking heads, Mayor, but everyone's happy with it's the mama bear or baby bear, which one is?
It's good at this point.
Yeah, I think the budget discussion probably made it easier for this presentation.
Just minds are occupied elsewhere.
I think we have to have further discussion too. As you know, last year we deferred people having to have landscape in, whether it was xeriscape or traditional. We deferred that. We're going to have to make a decision now on, are we going to defer that time frame? I'm not sure I saw that in here.
So this is the declaration. So we don't have a new declaration.
Yes,
but this
but
is the one we did last year.
But we are going to have to look at that and say, okay, do we give them another year? They've already had a year. Do we just require landscaping in the front and some deferral in the backyard? What do we do? Knowing that we're going to have scarcity of resources and water again this year. So this is separate kind of, I think we need to be thinking about that. One of the things that has been suggested by our residents is that we emphasize more on education instead of on penalties, so to speak. I know that we'll be installing some interesting things over at McGriff Park that we could maybe use for education. But this is something we're going to have to address, and we should be addressing, I think, relatively soon, so people know what moving forward is like. Because we've got houses now that have probably been out there a year and a half with nothing done.
Yeah, and it is becoming an issue. And then we also have other pressures from the secondary water providers. If council isn't aware, I know Mayor is because we've talked about it, but they have asked us to basically enforce their watering provisions because they don't have the staff to do it, and include basically an ordinance on. They would like us to create an ordinance that says you cannot install sod this year. and Dave has been to a lot of their meetings. I've asked him to be here to answer any questions, but him and his team have, and they are pushing very hard for water conservation this summer. And for the foreseeable future till the drought goes back to normal. So I think the mayor needs some direction on what you would like to see as a council in the emergency declaration, because the way they're set up is the mayor makes the declaration and brings it to you for approval after the fact, or he could get it approved before the fact. But if there's any major changes for this year, it'd be helpful to know so we can get it all in the right form and get it approved and all that.
I like approval in advance. But I would even suggest some of the residents have asked, do we need to examine the ordinance about having secondary water as a requirement if they're going to zero scape their yard? They're concerned about having to pay for water they're not using. And so, I mean, do we even look at that and say under these conditions, you're not required to have secondary water? Particularly with some of the connection fees that some are trying to charge in the city. And if you're not going to use it, I don't know why you would pay for it.
But there are subdivisions in southern Utah that have deed restricted the properties to a certain amount of landscaping, and they pay their fees based on that deed restriction. It is metered water, so the provider has the ability to review it, but we don't currently provide that as an option. Now, I don't know how the secondary water providers would react. Dave, any?
That's a good question. I don't either. At
Well,
least up here.
Yeah, I don't know if they can require you to hook up if you're not going to use it. I mean, that seems a little bit extreme to me that they can require that. And to me, if you're not going to use the water, it can almost be blackmail.
Well, probably the best example of that is Kayenta down northwest of St. George has no outdoor landscaping allowed, and they don't have secondary water.
Well, if somebody zero scape their whole yard, and just because our emergency water declaration allows for plants to be watered, just not sod, right?
Mhm.
So just a thought, we ought to be even thinking about that. Because I don't know why citizens would pay for something they're not going to use. All right, anything else, John?
No.
So, Councilmember Dalpaz, I see you have a question.
I keep thinking about all the new developments and, can we talk about having a percentage requirement of xeriscaping on brand new developments? Because it seems like that's the most natural, easiest place to start, because somebody says, okay, I'm building a home in North Ogden. I know because this has been set that I have to have 10%, 20% xeriscaping of my property. What John came up with looks good, and I think it's good guidance, but I mean, does it make sense to go a step further and ask that new developments have a certain percentage? Because clearly we're not going to be getting out of the drought anytime soon. And I think even when we are out of the drought, we're always going to be a desert. So to me, it makes sense for new developments, have an actual ordinance that says certain percentage is xeriscaping, and they know what they're getting into.
That's a thought. Okay, John, you need any further direction?
Just any changes from last year, I think for the declaration would be helpful. I'm not seeing anyone speaking up, so.
Well, I think we've got to address the time frame on whatever type of landscaping we utilize.
Mayor,
Councilmember Severin?
can I ask Dave? Maybe could Dave give us a little update on what's happening with culinary water right now? I know I walk by Rice Creek every morning. We're still not getting anything that seems to be excess water out of Rice, the ponds there at Rice, or the tanks up there at Rice Creek.
Councilmember Severin, could we wait to do that till council comments and mayor comments?
Oh, yeah.
Could we do that?
Well, I just, sure.
Yeah, I think then we could have
Okay.
a discussion specifically centered on that. Would that be okay?
I just thought it might have application to what we were talking about with
Yeah.
this. So,
Yeah, it definitely does.
Okay.
But I think we can concentrate on that because I think it's an excellent question.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Call. We'll expect council to give you direct comments on needed changes.
Okay.
Mayor, I'm sorry. I have a
Oh,
lot to say tonight.
go ahead,
I
Councilman
don't want to
Dalpas.
just talk, but the other thing that has come to my mind is that we need to make a decision on watering the flowers along Washington. I mean, clearly, that's a concern. So my understanding is that the flowers are basically committed for this budget year. But it would make sense if we considered to say, we're gonna take a year off or 2 years off, not even because of the financial implications, but just because of the water implications. So I think that might be something that we talk about as well. I think it's pertinent.
Thank you, good point. And council, be thinking about that. Do we require our citizens who zero skate their yard to connect to secondary water and pay the fee? Councilmember Swanson?
Just very quickly off the top of my head, I think it works for the original landowner who makes that decision, but then the next homeowner who wants to change is not connected. And whether we like it or not, they're gonna start using their culinary water, and which, we do have control over and is another limited source. I think maybe something along the lines of, you're not required to connect to it, but it has, Pineview is gonna stub it to the property so that if the secondary or tertiary
There you go.
homeowners decide, I want to connect, and they can pay that connection fee, and at least the stub is there. So that somewhere down the road, if somebody
Right.
decides to do that, they can flip their yard back to lawn if that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea in the development that it's available, but it's up to the user whether they want to connect or not, right?
Right.
Good point. Councilmember Barker?
Going back to just another example on property taxes. There's a lot of residents in our city that aren't connected to sewer, and we still pay a sewer tax every year. As well as the ones that are connected pay our utilization tax. But that's just something to think about. We pay for stuff. We don't use.
would make everybody keep paying.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. John, wasn't there a bill this year that said we needed to get everybody a secondary meter? Did it pass? Do you know?
Yes, it did pass, and it sets timelines as well as some funds available. But because we aren't a secondary provider, we aren't required to do it, but Pineview is required to meter all the water by 2030.
So, but and a lot of that said we're gonna be tied to ARPA funds too, or whatever through the secondary, but.
It is, I think it'll cover, it kind of phases out over time, but still the secondary water companies are gonna have to come up with a minimum of 20%. And the longer they wait, the more they're gonna have to pay to meter that, so.
And the funds allocated are extremely insufficient to cover the
Right,
metering. All the money will be spent the first year by those districts who can get the money in first.
and I believe you're only paying a sewer property tax if you're annexed into the sewer district. And a lot of the unincorporated county is not annexed in. I found that out personally. That if you're not annexed into the sewer district, you don't pay the tax. So I don't know how they get you annexed in. I think you have to request
Okay,
it.
well, I've been annexed in for a while then.
Yeah. That's good. Thanks for your contribution.
I'm glad to help you guys.
Appreciate it. All right. Councilmember Swanson, do you want to talk more about finances briefly, like very briefly?
Are you talking 90 minutes briefly?
I'm talking maybe 90 seconds is what I'm talking about
Okay, here we
briefly.
go. We're 67% of the year through the year has elapsed. General fund revenues are at 60%, but that was before we added, before we received our January sales tax. So I don't have an updated figure for you there. Building permits are 80% of projected property taxes, 100% collected. We're on target for our B and C road allotment. We've collected 3 of the 6 deposits. And you can see, John, would you show the property tax on the screen? You can see the red line there is our sales tax trend that we continue to exceed, not just last year, but projections. We are, let's see, $447,000 over projected year to date. We're 22.43% above projected, which defies logic, given all the economic uncertainty that surrounds us in the world, and it just continues. So we'll just be grateful, yes, and hopefully there isn't a major correction that hits us all of a sudden one month and then stays.
Like our depreciation.
Jamie, I believe this is where you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, I do. So based on that, we have 447,000 in excess. I do have a request from the police department that they need to possibly purchase a vehicle this year instead of next year, because one of their vehicles are having mechanical issues. It's not in the budget, but we need to bring it forward, and I just need to make council aware of it so that when we do budget amendments, you're aware that that's there. And I know I can't really get official approval, but I just need you to be aware that that's coming. The reason why I need to is because they need to order it now because of supplies. And we're not sure that they'll get it before June, or they possibly could get it after July. So, but they're in desperate need of a new one. It's about 47,000 said and done.
When is our next council meeting?
That's all.
Second week of April, 2 weeks.
I was hoping to do budget amendments on the 12th. I don't know that I can bring it forward. It might be the 26th, but I think that they kind of need an answer before then because they're waiting on that in order to make that purchase, to make the PO anyway.
I know for me, I'd like to see the numbers before we make that decision. So if
Okay.
there's any way to bring it to the 12th, that would be preferable for me.
Great. Thank you.
Okay,
So that's it, unless you want me to go another 89 minutes.
no, I think that's fine. I think the important thing is there we are living within the budget. And due to the, I think, sales tax and the continued building permits that are issued, we're in pretty safe territory to make sure we're having a balanced budget. So thank you, Councilmember Swanson. Now would be a time for public comments before we move on. I do want to have Councilmember Severing's question addressed because I think it's an extremely important question. So I want to have time for that, but do we have anyone here in the audience that would like to comment this evening and give us some input? Then John, if you would watch online for us.
Steph Casey, North Ogden resident.
Can you turn the lights back on?
Yeah, keep the lights.
Can't see you. Oh, there you go.
Just listening to you guys talk about the budget at the beginning and moving forward and how to do that. I had a comment of North Ogden's a great place to live, and I believe it is, which is why I'm here as much as I am, because I love it. It would just be interesting and great to get a little bit more public input on what that means to everyone, because I think that a great place to live can mean a lot of different things. And where we're at a time that the budget is going to be, among the departments, we're going to be very tightening up the belt, I guess. I think it'd be really nice that we're looking at where that money is spent and making sure that the needs and those basic things are really taken care of before we move on to some other things, because I think that we can all agree that a great place to live is somewhere where our parks work for us, that are, and then the other stuff is just maybe extras for everyone. It makes me think of a discussion I heard with planning commission where there was a type of property that was being labeled as a nuisance property. And it bothered me a little because a nuisance property can mean a lot of different things to different people. I know that. So I just, moving forward as we're working on the budget and the different departments, it'd be great to get as much public input on where we can move forward in those departments. So, thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. I do believe we would be good, Scott, I think, before we do a final approval on the land use, so we have one more open house. Because this has a great bearing on what our city's gonna look like long-term. Now, I know we've had some before, and I learned something over the weekend, I guess, and I'm just gonna make this comment. What's happening in our state is you've got a few people that are controlling the election of people. A lot of people are not engaged, and so those who are engaged are taking control of a lot of things. And I would say that it's very important that if you want to be involved, you step up and say something, because the vocal majority, the vocal minority, is controlling a lot of what takes place in our state. And we don't want to see that happen in the city. So I don't know what more we can do to encourage involvement in these type of decisions, because they're major, and it's unfortunate that most of the input comes after the decision is made. I'd really like to get input before the decision's made. So I think on the budget, obviously we have a budget open house, particularly if we have a truth and taxation hearing, but I think it's part of our process. Jamie, we should have, a specific session appointed to the public having a chance to review the budget along with the future land use map. So, John, do we have anyone online?
We do. We've got Randy Wynn.
Let's hear from Randy.
I think I'm unmuted
You
now.
might have the speaker muted.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. I appreciated the budget discussion that went on tonight. And I appreciate the planning that's gone into that. And I agree with a great deal that's been said. But if I could be a voice of caution a little bit tonight, and I have the same concern that Councilman Delpis has, that we need to be very careful about increasing and having reserve funds, and because it puts the city at a very comfortable position. But I liked the comment that Phil made about a dark cloud. Because if we get too comfortable, we've always got the monies to do things that maybe we should think harder about. This council has increased our budget largely in the last few years. As was pointed out, for 17 years, they rode without increasing the budget percent. And that doesn't mean that we had less funds then. That means that the population growth and the process and the price of the properties, they did have increases every year those years. And so I would be very cautious about leaving a percent and not letting the county make its adjustment, and being very careful as you go into a truth in lending, a truth in taxation session, to be careful what you're asking for. Inflation is going strong right now. Hopefully it will not last too long, but or go crazy like this for too long. But if we try to match what inflation is, we are helping inflation go forward. We're not solving the inflation problem. And most people in most businesses are not going to have salary increases to match inflation. And so I think we need to be careful with the public's money here. Just a caution, police, we all value police, but it's 38% of our budget. It's kind of like one of our, kind of like Social Security, something that's a huge amount of our national budget. Well, the police is a huge amount of our city budget. And we are one of the safest cities, which means we don't need the police that most cities do. And so we need to take that into consideration. Last month, there was an incident where 2 young men were captured down here in the park in front of where I happened to be at my desk. And we had 5 police cars there within 5 minutes. Now that's wonderful, except what it tells me is that we don't have a lot of other things going on in the city. And that's not surprising because we have a great city and we don't have a lot of problems. So I would say, let's don't get carried away with trying to have the finest police force in the state when we don't have anywhere near the kind of crime that we have there. And that doesn't put me against police. It's just say, I think we've gone real heavy in that the last few years, and we're going heavy in it as we're building new police office. So anyway, I don't say that to criticize what you've done. I said as a caution and to weigh this and be careful with it. Most families in our city probably do not have the option to have these reserve funds, but we're going to take money from them to create these reserve funds. So I just think we need to be very, very careful of that, and appreciate all you do. And but that's my caution tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Randy. And I would just remind this council has only increased out-of-pocket taxes one time. So I don't know where the comment comes from that this council has continued to increase taxes. First year, we transferred the $3 into property tax where it should have been in the first place. And last year, there was an increase in property taxes for a legitimate reason. I think that was explained very well. And I personally feel there is a correlation between police officers and safe city. Proactive policing, I think, is important, but your comments are well taken, and I think the council understands, that we're conservative. We're not spending money just because it's available. And I would tell you most of the businesses, Randy, that I know of are increasing their salaries dramatically because of the shortage of workers and the cost of retraining those workers. So I think that, comparing 17 years ago till today, last I heard, inflation hasn't been like this since the 80s. And so we're in a very unique situation, and we're no different than the businesses experiencing major inflation. I mean, you think about the parks, the cost of fertilizer, John, is up dramatically. It's doubled. Now, maybe we don't have to fertilize the parks. But just about everything the city uses is seeing increasing in cost. So, I think we've been very prudent tonight, saying our initial response is to go back and say, okay, this is the amount of money we're going to spend, not what was requested, but what was spent. So I just want to stick up for the council. I think that's an accurate statement to say this council has continued to increase property taxes. They've done it one time. So with that, any other public comments?
Spencer Alexander, 1740 North, 150 East. Just want to touch base with you. I had a wonderful meeting last Thursday with Paul Burnett from Trout Limited and Melissa from what is called the non-point source funding. And they looked over the section upstream that we did the cleanup at, but they saw a lot of potential in it. We're pretty thrilled with the idea, and we bounced a lot of ideas back and forth. So I believe I'm going to go ahead and try to get that grant. And my understanding is it could be a really large, substantial sum of money. that we can apply for now. It is quite competitive, but that would be a great addition for us to move forward on that section of stream if that's a possibility. I also wanted to mention that April 12th, there's a group of students from Venture Academy that wanted to do some service. And so they're going to clean up the wetlands area, remove some of the wood, lots of the garbage. I was going to see if there's a possibility that we might be able to get them some sort of garbage removal that's available for the city. I don't know if there is. That might be something they'll have to figure out, but they are. So if you know anybody that wants to be involved in that, that'd be a great thing. April 12th in the morning. So yeah, just wanted to make you aware of that. So thank you.
So April 12th, is that a Tuesday, Spencer?
I believe so.
Because that's a
I'll double check.
Council meeting, yeah,
meeting that
I think it's,
That'll be in the morning.
I'm sure we could get something down there for, the parks, hopefully for them to deposit all the,
Yeah, I was just thinking off of 100 East there,
Yeah.
somewhere would be a good spot for them.
Councilman Barker, would you check on that as part of your assignment to see what we could do to accommodate that cleanup? John, do we have anyone else online?
We do. We've got Brenda Ashdown.
All right, let's hear from Brenda.
Brenda Ashdown. I live in North Ogden. Good job, Jamie. I have three concerns or three comments. I'll speak quickly. I disagree with the comments earlier about the police department. I think the city direction of having one police officer per every 1,000 is a really good number. Totally agree with that. I realize that their budget is high, but I also want to feel protected and safe in my city. Second comment is about the new land use map and the zoning. I feel that some of the reason that maybe we've lost some of the conservation land is the feeling that I get from a lot of residents is when a developer comes in and wants to develop a property, there's not been an existing zoning that the council looks at and says, no, this is already zoned, whatever it is, and we're not going to change it. And I would hope, but by having this new land use map, that would be the direction that the council would go, is yes, you're welcome to build houses there as long as you follow the zoning that is already there. And the third item is my property years ago was annexed from Weber County into North Ogden City. When it was annexed, it was automatically annexed into the sewer. I have paid sewer for years and years and years and never had any access whatsoever to the sewer. And I have a question that you probably can't answer. I have never had secondary water. You said tonight something about Pineview having to put those hookups on every house. Does that mean that they will provide my house with a hookup, whether I use it or not? And then am I going to be responsible for some share of that, even though I don't use it? Thank you.
Good questions, Brendan. I think what we were talking about is new development there. And I do believe that when the sewer district annexes parcels in there, it's pretty wide swath of land that they do that with. So thank you for your comments. John, anyone else?
We do have Susan Kilborn.
Okay. Susan, we'll get to you. Don't run away.
You're not gonna run away from me.
No, this was Susan Clements.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Oh, no, you're on, Susan, but we were talking about Susan Clements running.
Well-
away, not you.
Well, Mr. Mayor, am I talking or not?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna keep it short. I love you guys. This has been such a great meeting. And when I looked at the budget stuff with you guys, it was like a Will Smith to my face, totally. And I can't tell you how many ideas are swirling through my head on conservation. And I just need somebody who is brave enough to work with me, because I have so many ideas where we can cut money. in our budget. Why am I not on city council? I don't understand it. Anyway, I would love for somebody to work with me with this, but in the interest of time and getting you out of here before 9 o'clock, I'll pick on one or all of you by email with my ideas.
Perfect, Susan. We appreciate that. And once again, I would just make mention, probably the best individual for you to communicate with would be Mr. Swanson, since that is his assignment. You're always welcome to communicate with whoever you'd like. But Phil might be the one that could help things progress quickly.
Well, I don't know. Maybe Phil doesn't like me.
Phil.
Are you looking at the camera, Susan? Come on.
Yes, I am. And your hair looks awesome.
All right, so Phil will work with you. That'll be
On
good.
that comment, yes, I'll work.
Yes, that's great.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Susan Kilborn. Susan Clements.
Thank you, Susan Clements, and yes, I'm a North Ogden citizen, you guys all know. And I could have sent this to John and not stand up, but on the xeriscaping, I just might suggest that you put a meaning under xeriscaping. It's not xeroscaping.
Zero.
It is actually using less water rather than using no water. No, we flipped our strip last year, starting middle of August, which was a stupid time to do it. But we flipped our strip and we really have xeriscaping in our park strip in front right now. But that is not necessary. We didn't have water to our park strip. And so that's why we did not put any type of plants in it at all. And it's really quite beautiful with rock and brick. And we called the city and got recommendations for what we should do. And they were good to work with. So perhaps just a definition again, John, of what xeriscaping is, not zero-scaping. And good conversation tonight. It's good to be here, finally.
Yes. Welcome back. As you know, all of us have trouble with words, so. Sandy?
Sandy Cochran, North Ogden resident. There is a section of sidewalk that runs along Washington between 1700 and I think it's 1825, where you turn into the car wash at Prominence Point. That section of sidewalk right there is buckling, and there's one area that's had standing water for like a year and a half. And it's next to the big sign that Coldwell has that's got all the amenities that they're really not going to give us, but they're on that map. I'll get back to what my original point was. I just wanted to get that in also. So that water is just there all the time. I've complained about it, like probably 6 months ago. I don't know where it comes from, but it's ruining the sidewalk. The grass between the sidewalk and the road has sunk. So when me and my dog walk by there, I have to pick him up, go into the road to get around that, because he's a mini dachshund and his legs are this tall. And if I make him walk through it, he's covered with it, and it's nasty. It's slimy, it's green, so I'm just complaining, and I would like something done about it.
We have Dave here.
I talked to Dave about 6 months ago.
Dave, can you get that fixed?
Yeah, we'll address it. I mean,
All
it's still
right.
probably part of that construction, but we'll do it.
But there's no construction going on right here.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ekstrom, will you work with Dave to see what resources he needs to get that taken care of? Thank you, Dave. Anything else, John, online? Anyone else here like to make a comment? All right, thank you for your comments this evening, and Susan, welcome back. It's good to see your smiling face. All right, let's go on to council, mayor, and staff comments. I would like to start, council member Severing, with you on your question. I think it's pertinent.
So Dave, that involved you, and I would not want your job, Dave, because these artesian wells and water, groundwater all over the city.
Yeah.
Can cause that
Everywhere we
kind
need
of
it. So to answer your question, the springs and wells, well, the wells always produce the same. The springs have came up, but take that as a face value. So all this time, every year, the springs start coming back up, right? Rice Creek in the last week or so has came up about 100 gallons per minute, which is a good thing. Coldwater about 20, and North Ogden about 75. The reason I say, take that at face value is because at this time of year, we actually want to see those springs coming up so much that, in past years, we've seen Rice Creek come up anywhere from 700 to 1,400 gallons per minute more than we are right now. And so what they do is we have to turn those out into the creeks because they actually stir up so much sediment, right? So we're planning on not actually having to turn out any of those. So we will be able to capture that water, which is a good thing. But it's looking like we're about at the same place we were last year, as far as our totals.
A year ago, this March.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So 12 months ago, we're looking about the exact same place we were. So where we'll start losing those springs early August instead of late October, even into November in most good years. Last year we lost those, as early as late July, early August. So that's kind of what we're expecting again. So we'll have to run a lot more wells. The wells they're running well. They're recharging okay. We had a couple of the higher wells. So the wells on the flats recharge very well because there's a bigger pull to pull from, right? The ones up on the hill, they take a little longer to recharge. Jason and his team they've done a wonderful job of being able to, we'll take water from the west side of town until that gets to a point where he feels like we need to let that well recharge. He'll turn that completely off. We'll go to the east side of town. We'll pull water from there for a while. In our presentation on the 12th, we'll actually get to show you kind of how we move that water around. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. So we're kind of where we were last year, but we are capturing more water just in the last couple of weeks here.
So does that contribute to our discussion on xeriscaping? Do we want to?
Well, I think we're in a long-term drought myself. But we surely ought to consider that. I think, Dave, one of the questions I had, you hear about the groundwater not absorbing, it's running off more. Obviously, we're not seeing that. They said we were in a much better position, so the water just didn't run into the ground. It would run into the streams.
Yeah.
We're not seeing that yet, I guess.
No, not yet.
Then we, as you'll recall, I think it was in July when we had to start pumping all the water.
Yep.
We increased the fee to cover the pumping. Are we going to reduce that? Are you going to watch that closely to make sure if the streams we don't have to pump?
Yeah, and so, yeah, of course. And so this, like I said, this time of year, March, end of March. So you got April, May, and June that obviously we're going to use more spring water than we probably, any time of the year. But we still are using more wells than we should be right now. Like I said, Rice Creek's only came up 100 gallons per minute. At this time, we should be looking at more 700 to 1,100. So we're still pumping a lot more water than we would like to. So yes, I still think we should be keeping those fees as far as pumping them.
Okay.
For engineering or for electricity costs and stuff.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for all you do.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Appreciate it. Councilmember Severing.
If I can just say one more thing, Dave, So, and I know I've mentioned this before, but because I live close enough to the hills, I'm wondering if those signs that we put up, like at the top of 1050 and the end of Mountain Road, those signs that we, and some people are just gonna blow by them anyway and go up into the mountains. But I wonder if we could put some of those signs a little bit more prominently where, I think with them, like the one that's just above my house, it just blends into the fact that it's in a parkway. And I've watched people all week when they're those side by sides going up into the, and it really doesn't do that much good to call the police because there's so many different exits.
Yeah.
We couldn't. So I'm just wondering if there was a way that we could start putting those signs a little bit more prominently so that people almost have to go around them to go up there. So it's just clear.
Okay, yeah, and we.
Could you
definitely
guys
look
do
at
that?
Look at different colors, maybe try to.
Maybe even
grab their
larger
attention.
signs.
Okay.
I found one of them that was dragged up in a big oak brush. If you want me to bring it back down tomorrow morning.
Yeah, we'll definitely, we can definitely get a look into that.
And maybe, if you don't mind, will you let me know where you're gonna put them so I can. I don't want to sound like I'm saying, hey, you know what, I don't trust you guys, but I'd like it just prominently, because my biggest fear is that with this drought, somebody's gonna be up there on a motorcycle or a side by side, they're gonna blow past it, we're gonna have a big fire and everything's just gonna burn. And I'm an optimistic guy and I don't want to see that.
So we can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Severing, do you have any other
I'm done.
questions? Councilmember Barker.
I pushed out an update yesterday to Katie with my other assignment with mosquito board. We've got big mosquitoes out now and we can't kill them. So, because we aren't spraying yet. So with this cooler weather, wetter weather, you might get mosquitoes again.
I understand the bite's a little bit more severe than the normal mosquito.
Yes. And then the other one is tomorrow's my favorite day where open burning starts. So everyone can start lighting their fires in their backyards starting tomorrow for the next 2 months. So. I've had it.
Which day reminds me, we ought to start communicating about what we're gonna do in the pit this year. So, Councilman Valpas, do you have anything you'd like to address this evening?
No.
Councilmember Ekstrom?
Nope.
Councilmember Swanson?
Just a couple of quick things. David, I spoke with you about Northview Baptist Church. Were you able to get back to Pastor Dave about their desire to xeriscape there?
Yes.
Okay, great. I've been asked by a number of residents if we're going to have a discussion anytime soon about recycling and revisiting that. If council's okay, John, if we could get that on, say, a May agenda, and at least just have a general discussion where we can have an idea of where the market is now and take a look at things and decide where we are.
So we had kind of anticipated that being part of the budget discussion.
Okay, great. But you're, again, 1 step or 10 ahead of me. I wanted to let you all know that I've been invited to a youth suicide and substance abuse prevention summit down at Bryce Canyon in June. And so I'll be attending that and I'll give you a report back on that. I'm pretty excited to be part of that. Also, with all the talk about xeriscaping, there are a couple of extensions that specialize in xeriscaping. I'd love for us to put on a xeriscaping open house and invite these experts to the senior center, and they'll bring their displays and they can talk you through what plants and how to do it. And some of it, when it's done right, is absolutely stunning. Really beautiful with flowers that bloom at different times. And so I'm considering doing that to my front yard, just cause. And then piggybacking on Councilman Severing's comments on the ATVs and stuff going up into the hills, other than the road up at going up 1050, because Pineview uses that to access there. Is it possible for us to put in concrete bollards with a chain going across so that you can't just, I mean, it's more than just a sign, that we make it a little bit more serious and more difficult for vehicles?
I would love to see that at every entrance up there.
Yeah. Well, the one, we'd have to make sure Pineview has a key to it. they're at the top of 1050 because they go up to their reservoir there.
The reservoir.
But yeah, I've long thought that, concrete bollards with chain, big heavy chain that goes across would keep most vehicles out, not the motorcycles, they'll just go around the bollards, but the side by sides and those knuckleheads that own Jeeps. I don't go up there, but there are some who do.
I've seen.
Not me, not mine. That's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And Dave, I think on that comment too, there's a lot of side by sides driving around over. They're just off of 2600 where the Parks has the restroom and the topsoil. And that's pretty close to residential areas, so we ought to make sure we try to keep the weeds down or whatever else. We're probably gonna have a fire there too, because I don't know how we close that off. It's so open. So, okay, anything else? John?
Nothing else, Mayor.
All right, I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn this meeting then.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, Councilmember Ekstrom, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, meeting is adjourned.
Yes.
Mayor,